Now, the Joburg City Council met for the first time yesterday after Executive Mayor Mpho Phalatse returned to office this week. Phalatse has been reinstated by the South Gauteng High Court after she challenged what she called the ANC coup following her removal from office early in the month. Responding to the High Court judgment, Gauteng Premier and ANC provincial chairperson Phanyaza Lesufi this week said it's a short-lived memory, or victory, I should say. Meanwhile, the DA's Ekurhuleni Mayor Tania Campbell was removed on Wednesday through a motion of no confidence after 100 councillors supported her removal while 93 voted against it. Matshepiso Finca, director of Resolution SA, who also stood as an independent candidate in the 2021 local government elections, joins us now for a conversation. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you on the program.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I mean, so much is happening, and I suppose, you know, we need to get an understanding. And so I suppose the start is, what are your thoughts on what has panned out in two of Gauteng's three metros? I mean, Joburg City Mayor Mpho Phalatse back in through a court judgment, and Tania Campbell out as a Ekurhuleni Mayor.
Well, sadly, it is unsurprising to me. If anything, after the last local government elections, I was observing and watching keenly to see how long the DA coalitions would hold in these cities, especially given that in the last round, in the city of Johannesburg, after Herman Mashaba's resignation, we saw a similar tactic employed by the ANC when that void was developed with Herman Mashaba's resignation and the DA then losing that council headship. So it's unsurprising it was coming, and the reason I say that is because as I assess the political landscape in South Africa and the developing trend of coalition governments, which is here to stay for the foreseeable future at least, I cannot see how these coalition governments can hold, how they can be stable, given that ultimately they are formed by the opposition parties who in themselves do not get an outright majority, ultimately with the view to provide an alternative to the ANC in these metros, in these municipalities. But if you look at the combination of these opposition parties, the DA being the bigger and then the smaller parties, I, for one, have always asked myself what their common cause and objective is that would hold them together. Is the basis of their marriage common understanding and respect and mutual respect and compromise? Do they have commonalities in terms of objectives and principles and values and policy imperatives in terms of their governance objectives? I'm not sure that those criteria that are satisfactorily are answered in the current coalition. So it really becomes a game of bargaining over seats, over power, and obviously, as we've seen, the smaller parties will quickly jump ship as soon as somebody proposes something more convenient and comfortable to them.
And it's a great worry because, you know, it just seems it's never going to end. I mean, if we look at the reactions that have come out this week, I mean, Tania Campbell basically saying, we will be a good opposition. That was her sort of final words. While Phanyaza Lesufi's response was that the ANC is still deciding whether to appeal or take the opposition benches, also saying that Phalatse should not get too comfortable, to quote. I mean, does it sound like the city and the residents are in for an absolute roller coaster ride?
This is precisely why, for me, there's a need for us as citizens in this country who have the power of the vote, which truly that's what it is, to truly reconsider how we vote, especially at local government level where political platitudes truly have no place. At the local government level and service delivery, people need to see governments working effectively. The speeches, the political games, etc., will simply not do it, because when there's no efficient and effective government in place, we feel it immediately, firsthand in the quality of our lives. But South Africans vote even at local government level with the same thinking and the same cap that they apply in voting in provincial and national government elections, for one. Do not realize that the evolution of our local government landscape in the first place was meant to empower citizens to get close to local government, to their local governments, so that it becomes a partnership rather than us ceding our power completely to the political parties to continue their political games and wranglings at our expense as residents, even at local government level.
So I want to talk to you on a personal level. I mean, as we mentioned in the introduction, and you spoke to it as well. You put up your hand and contested as a candidate in the 2021 local government elections. I suppose the question is why? Why did you feel that you wanted to do this?
Well, as I just said, the Constitution has always empowered participation in local government elections, to take place not just with political parties on the ballots, but ordinary citizens who are involved in their communities, who have a deeply vested interest in their communities, to put their hand up and participate. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, local government at some point got hijacked, like the other spheres of government, by party political dominance. And as citizens, in our semi-asleep state, we kind of allowed that phenomenon to develop, and we ceded our sovereign right and responsibility, constitutional responsibility, to be involved in the affairs that affect our daily lives. And so with the party political dominance system, local government, contrary to what was intended, became another extension of party political wrangling and deployment, etc., rather than it being a matter of genuine organic community leaders and residents emerging within their own communities, actually, in leading the affairs that concern the communities in which they have deeply vested interest. Yeah. And so having seen even the councillor candidates where I lived at the time, DA candidates, and with all due respect, realizing that you don't necessarily have candidates deployed in these positions at ward level or even on the PR side of the council votes, who are necessarily the highest, the quality and most competent candidates, never mind people who actually are from the community, understand the issues, have an invested interest in the development of those communities. If anything, they're accountable to their political parties, just as you find in the national and provincial levels. They're not necessarily even directly to the constituencies and residences in the communities they're meant to serve. Yeah. And so having been involved in my community, I felt at this that with the changing landscape, I said in an interview some months ago, that the wheels of change are turning. It's inevitable. As you know, we are even undergoing a process of electoral reform. As much as there are stalling tactics in that regard, it's inevitable. There's change, there's desperation. We've seen the monumental failure on all levels of governance under the current dispensation. And there's a need for something new and something fresh.
There certainly is, but it's quite difficult, though, when you look at these different situations that we find ourselves in, and it is nice, but obviously South Africans are a little bit nervous when it came to going in and voting an independent and wondering, can they stand up to the big guys? And all of those questions were raised at the time, and I imagine they still will be. But if we look at the current situation, I mean, South Africa's local governance sphere shows that the country might be way past that era of political dominance, and coalitions are definitely here to stay. I mean, that we're beginning to see. But the problem is, what features in a coalition of parties that, that sort of should come together and that this should work. But instead of the constant fighting and the battle for power that we keep seeing, and the idea is that these coalitions should be looking at service delivery. And yet I worry that service delivery is the last thing on their agenda because they're too worried about who holds the key to the office.
I could not add to that. You are spot on, and it's not a figment of our imagination as citizens, as residents. It is a reality. We have seen service delivery compromise. The fact that these political parties would enable, through their own conscious or unconscious tactics, this kind of instability to prevail in this municipality, barely a year in, because of their political contestations to take place, inevitably compromising service delivery, tells you, at the end of the day, we are still in a dispensation where the political party is sacrosanct, and the resident and the citizen is a secondary consideration. It is about the party political objectives, their power contests, their resource contests, and ultimately to get the levers of power primarily to serve their own purposes. Fortunately, some of the parties, I make it sound particularly, grim and dark, but I do believe there's a party or two, for whom they have a genuine intention to serve as well. But inevitably, the way the system is designed lifts up the political party at the expense of the resident and the citizen. And these and these coalitions, as you say, we live in a society that is so divided historically. You would imagine, especially at this juncture where there's an opportunity to create an alternative, that the smaller parties, opposition parties, could truly come together and form a formidable force that can form this alternative with mutual respect, seeing each other as human beings rather than just pawns in the political game, and actually work together to serve this country at this desperate juncture. But they cannot even do that because politics trumps service delivery.
So, would you ever run again? Would you do it again?
I think I would. It was a baptism of fire, putting our hand up, being naive, independent candidates who are not political creatures by nature, but simply citizens who are responsible and community leaders who wanted to serve. But to realize the stakes, to realize what is at stake and why there's so much contestation, over these offices in the first place, and the reality of the fragility of the political system and the games. And so we were casualties in many ways for having dared to step into the scene. But we are not, we are not discouraged. The need remains. As I said, the prospect of electoral reform is on the horizon. It's inevitable. It cannot be stopped. And an alternative is needed. And I'm hoping more and more South Africans will take it upon themselves to consider stepping into a void, really, which still remains and is going to grow in the current desperation of party political wrangling.
It certainly is. One of the worries, though, as well, when we talk about coalitions is the issue of accountability. And it feels like there aren't really clear lines when it comes to accountability. Do you agree with that sentiment?
100%. I mean, the fact that a party, a minority party, even in the city of Johannesburg's case, for example, that had one seat could, dismantle the coalition arrangement at a whim, really, tells you that there is no accountability. And I think in our current setup, the only way that coalition dispensation could actually hold water is if there was a legal framework that was created to almost enforce these coalition, arrangements, so that the parties who are signatory to them respect them and uphold them and are accountable to their partners within these coalition arrangements, instead of just being persuadable at a whim to just change their allegiance. But at the same time, the question becomes, do we as citizens want those kind of arrangements? Do we want forced marriages to oversee a critical governance function in our society? You would want a coalition of partners and parties who have common cause, which is part of the reason why this kind of arrangement is common cause in Europe and has been since, the Second World War, for example, because there is common cause. The partners are able to come together with a clarity of a vision, of a focus, and that is not the case in our setup. I find that there's too much of a divergence of philosophical motivation, of policy imperatives, etc., that you don't really have that glue that can hold these partnerships, so that there is that accountability to actually ensure that they hold.
Yeah. Just finally, I mean, going towards the 2024 elections and the anticipated likelihood of what we've been talking about, coalitions, the way of the future, and with the predictions that the ANC are not going to get an outright majority, people are nervous and asking what will happen post-2024 at a national level, as we've been seeing demonstrated in municipalities already.
Absolutely. I wish people were a little bit more nervous than they seem to be at this point, because if you think about it without even over-analyzing, the EFF, for one, is a major player and the kingmaker, as some have dubbed, even in the municipal landscape, and that will continue to be the case even at national level. Even though their leaders initially, over time, pronounced that they would never have anything to do with any kind of partnership with the ANC, we have seen them renege from that position at the local government level, and who is to say they will not do the same thing at provincial and national level and throw their lot with the ANC, which is likely to fall behind, below 50%, as you say. And then we would be looking at that kind of coalition, an ANC-EFF arrangements with the opposition party seemingly being too disorganized, too weak, amongst other things, to take advantage of this gap that has been created in our governance system. Yeah. So it is an extremely grim and frightening prospect, and so we really truly have to get smarter as citizens in how we cast our vote, and not necessarily, and observe these developments at the local level, as you say, they are telling, and not just continue to vote sentimentally as we have been doing all along.
Finally, and if you can, within a minute, I know it's a big conversation, but this electoral amendment bill, and I'm sure you have got views on this. I mean, you've got a lot of lobby groups saying that it has a negative bias towards independent candidates. So we spoke in those local elections, local government, we saw that happening. But on a national level, let's talk there. What do you think about this bill?
It is frightening what's happening. I always say there's no turkey that will vote for Christmas. So I fully understand why the incumbents and the political parties that are assuming seats on a PR basis in the National Assembly and the provincial legislatures would definitely be opposed to even the prospect of independence or anybody else wanting to contest the space and share the vote with them. But at the same time, a ruling was made by the Constitutional Court on the 20th of June in 2020 that electoral reform needs to take place. And what they have done with the amendment bill as it stands is a complete betrayal of that Constitutional Court ruling. And they know it fully well. They know it won't hold water. They know it will be contested and taken back to the courts. And that's just compromising the stability and our transition towards some kind of a different dispensation in terms of our electoral system, with 2024 looming at the same time. So it's a very dangerous game that we see being played here, with Parliament truly not having given credence to what they were supposed to have done over the last 2 years, in drafting a bill that makes sense and not what really truly they have come up with, which at the moment completely disqualifies the prospect of an independent standing. The level, the field has been made so completely uneven that it makes it almost impossible, for different kind of political representative to enter the space and to participate.
Matshepiso, thank you so much. Thanks very much for talking to us here on the program. Matshepiso is of Resolution SA, discussing the state of South Africa under coalitions at the local government sphere.